I am so grateful for who and how you are. I think of all the times we have collaborated and conspired, we have dreamed and dared, we have wept and laughed together. And I just am thankful for who you are and how you are, and for taking time to be here. Would you say a word about who you are and why you do what you do?
Well, hey, I'm Rodney Sadler. I am Associate Professor of Bible, Director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was pleased to be able to go to Howard University, so one of the premier African American institutions in the country, was trained there to be about understanding how our people have always contributed to the world and want to make sure that we make the best contributions that we can. I was trained at Howard University School of Divinity with some of the most amazing theological scholars in the country. And they always talk to me about the theological commitments to bring about transformation. Worked closely with a number of people, one of whom was Kane Hope Felder. And I worked with something I helped him found when he started the Biblical Institute for Social Change. And it's been years later that I reflected on it, that it helped me to see that the Bible was not just for soul salvation, it was for social change. And we need to be involved in utilizing that power that we find in the text to unleash new narratives of freedom and liberation in the world.
So, with all of that, how is it that you reckon with churches who are by and large theological justifiers for the very systems and theologies that are oppressing people, that are attacking people, that are brutalizing people day after day after day?
Well, I think that I pray that I never surrender those churches to that sort of broken ideology, broken theology. I hope my job is to awaken in them a different sense of understanding of what it is that the text has said, what it is our theology should be in response to that text, and how it is that we're supposed to enter the world. I don't believe that the church is ever meant to be, as Dr. King called it, a polite social institution for those who are living comfortably in the world. That we should not sit silently behind the anesthetizing silence of stained glass windows. I think that we were always to be in churches, energized to go out into the world to bring about transformation. One of the lines that most inspires me when I read scripture is the simple line, a throwaway line from the Lord's Prayer, as it said in the book of Matthew, Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And it reminds me that our job is to be about the manifestation of God's kingdom on earth, not somewhere else, but on earth, so
Right.
that the church's job is always to be about transformation. So one of the things I like to do is when I'm engaged with congregations is to stir them up, to have them question what the tenets of their faith are, and if they're tenets of their faith, leave them comfortably within the sanctuaries, and leave them comfortably in a faith that comes to church on Sunday and comes to church on Wednesday, and for the rest of the week goes on about its life. Then that's
Because how
not,
did that happen? I mean, if the biblical text is so clear
yeah.
in sending us out as a movement to transform the world, how did we end up with so many churches who simply justify what's happening right now? Some of the awful, brutal things that are happening right now
Because I
are
think that
excused by the church.
yes, yes, yes. I think in a very real way, and please forgive me for jumping in there, but I think in a very real way, the church represents power.
Mm.
Faith community represents power. And because we have such a strong commonplace in the Bible and in the manifestation of the church, for years, people have claimed the church in their struggles for justice, freedom, and liberation, or for oppression and the maintenance of a status quo. If you look at Frederick Douglass's 1845 Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, the appendix thereof, as a great conversation where he talks about the difference between the two churches he saw. One of them was the slaveholding religion of the South, and the other was the Christianity of Christ. And between the two of these, you could see no possible opportunity for overlap. And I think that what we dare not to recognize today is that an entire section of our faith community is the unrepentant, un unconfessed children of the slaveholding religion of the South. We never dealt with these issues. We actually had the church in the aftermath of the Emancipation Proclamation, in the aftermath of the Civil War. The church is the institution that began to crystallize what the established racial boundaries would be that would eventually foster Jim Crow and the sort of segregationists in the South. And they used the biblical text to support it. People were intentionally misappropriating the text in order to support paradigms of oppression.
I
It's a,
think of Howard Thurman,
yeah.
who used to argue that when we stand at a distance, we become theological justifiers for the very systems that have pushed people with their backs against the wall. The gospel, he argued, was born there,
Mhm.
as the prophets were with among the communities of people pushed by systems, by theologies, by structures, so that their backs are against the wall. When we move from there to a place of privilege, we lose the story and become the justifiers.
Amen.
What then do we do? And what's public theology got to do with any of that? And can you tell me that in a way as if I was somebody just standing on the street struggling with the way things are going? What's public theology got to do
Yeah.
with any of this?
Thank you for that question. I don't know that I'll do great justice to it. I'm going to try, though. I'm going to start off by saying that I think what public theology has to do with it is a reminder that Jesus does not fit safely inside the four walls of the sanctuary, that
Mm,
Jesus needs to come out in the street and meet the people that are there. And the Jesus that we see was always in the streets meeting people there, was never, Jesus of the temple who just sort of sat there. Jesus was always in the streets involved and engaged. So I think reminding people of the necessary engagement in the larger world of who
right.
Jesus was is a good place to begin. But then we again have to go back down and dig in deep on to the messages that Jesus raised. Jesus's primary ethos was premised on two different texts, and he made them very clear. When asked what the greatest commandment was, for example, in Luke chapter 10, the preface to the Good Samaritan narrative, Jesus well, he's actually told this by a lawyer, and he confirms it. In other passages, he makes it the claim himself that the primary law is to he's asked what is the greatest commandment, and he is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, your mind, your strength, from Deuteronomy 6:5, and love your neighbor as yourself, from Leviticus 19:18b. And you say, well, hold on now. You've already violated it. We asked what the one great law was. And the point is that you can't separate those two laws. Those two laws are inseparable. You can't say that you love God if you don't love humanity. 1 John chapter 4, verses 20 and 21 says it better than anything else. How can you say you love a God you've not seen if you
Right.
don't love your brothers and sisters whom you have seen? There's a necessity of engaging and caring for those who are around us if we are to say that we love God and we express God. So I think that the church needs to remember, it needs to be remembered, i.e., reconnected with itself, its history, its story, so that it can find again the authenticity of the need to express this sort of greater vision of love. It needs to be remembered to a larger understanding of the fight for justice and truth in the midst of the larger world. It needs to be remembered to the fact that it was never supposed to be aligned with the powers and principalities, because, as you said, quoting Thurman, those who have their backs against the wall, we're going to talk about the gospel. I love the way he divides between Jesus and Paul. Paul, he's sort of a guy that sits in well with the system. Jesus, if you fell into a ditch, would be another Jew in a ditch. Was crucified like so many other Jews on a cross. Jesus was a common person that dealt with the experiences of common people, that was trying to say we can have a better world too. And in the better world that we can have comes in reimagining how we see ourselves in the midst of this world in relationship to a God who's made us all worthy.
What does imagination have to do with any of this? And how do we begin to reimagine this country, reimagine what it means to be church, reimagine ministry?
Well, thank you for that. And I think when I think about Reimagining America project, a Reimagining America project is actually a truth and reconciliation process that a friend of mine and I, Jennifer Roberts, former mayor of Charlotte, and I started about 5 years ago. We were out in the streets the first day of the George Floyd uprising in Charlotte, and we realized that it looked like a number of white supremacists were trying to lead the crowd into the beginning parts of a civil war, a black against white. They wanted to get people to start firing bullets and then cause this kind of motion. And there was a lot of tension out there. And as we looked at each other, we said, we've got to stop doing the same old common dance, i.e., people come out, protest, city council says, we're going to do everything to change everything, and they do nothing. And then the police say, oh, we're going to fix these things that are wrong with the system, and they do nothing. And then they get somebody to come down from the police department in Washington, the police, federal, whatever, and they say, oh, look how wonderful all the changes that they made, and they're not gonna to bring you together and tear gas you, and they're not going to do these things. Aren't you happy? All right. And then things go on, and then 2 months later, the same thing happens again. So we said, why don't we do something different? Why don't we look at transforming the larger systems and think about the work it would take to do it? And before we do that, why don't we make sure that we show people what's actually going on? So the first part of Reimagining America project was to say, let's see clearly what is going on. Let's let you see the way that race impacts housing, and race impacts healthcare, and race impacts education, and race impacts every dimension of life, environmental justice, environmental issues. So how does race impact every dimension of life in society? And in as much as it's influencing every dimension of life, how is it that it's limiting all of our potential to be the best America that we can be, economically, socially, politically, whatever? And then once we've identified the problems that exist, let's think about what things would look like if we got them right. What would it look like? What would imagination look like? So how do we imagine the kind of country you want to live in? What would the systems that were in place look like? What would the policies that enforce those systems look like if we got things right? What things would have to change? What injustices might have to be addressed? What redress might need to be made for past exploitation? How might we begin to look at all of these things and then begin to work towards a system that has the possibility of change? I love this idea of imagination as a powerful tool, though. I've talked before about the notion of narrative shaping the way that we live our lives in the world. And narrative is nothing without if it's not fueled by imagination. A narrative that's trapped within the extant state, narrative that's trapped in the status quo, narrative that's trapped in the extant injust is a broken narrative. We need a reimagined narrative, a narrative that allows us to think about possibilities and push the boundaries of what is. And only once we have that sort of reimagined vision of what can be, might we live into something different. Something inside for so strong for me means that there's an unconquerable dimension of the human soul. Uh, and it's not necessarily an isolated one in my soul versus in our collective soul. There's something about us that makes us realize that we're not made to be oppressed, and we're not made to be left out, and we're not made to be to underachieve our potential. And the world is better when we're all able to achieve our potential. There's something inside that is so strong that we need to nurture it. We need to lift it up. We need to encourage all people to live up to their full potential. And when I think about this notion of something inside so strong, it reminds me of the fact that we all have agency. And as an American person, a person who lives in a theoretical democracy, I realize that democracy is only strong as a democracy if each and every individual within that democracy has the ability to effectuate change. And they realize that ability and they foster the kind of world that they want. If the world that they want is not achieved, then they've not done the job yet that they need to do. We need to work together to bring about the kind of changes that we want to see. There's something in us that is undeniable, that is strong enough to live up to these circumstances and situations, and that can bring about the kind of change that we want to see.